And tonight we welcome Michael Krasny, who is the award-winning host of the award-winning KQED's Forum, which, almost like our program, is a news and public affairs program that concentrates on the arts, culture, health, business, and technology. We kind of
cover all bases too.
A lot of politics. But I am fascinated by who you are. We met recently at a party, and I asked, I won't describe the party, but I did ask, what are you doing here? And you said, well, you know, I get around.
I think I also told you I was doing some cultural anthropologic field work.
Yes, and so that's why I'm not going to talk about the party or its nature, but the fact is that we are really honored to have you. You have a remarkable job to do. I want to talk about politics. I want to talk about the media. I want to talk about that. And then I want to talk about you a little bit. Some things that I got from your book, Off Mic, right?
Off Mic.
Yeah, it's a great book, and there'll be a link at our website so they can read it at Amazon.com. They can read at least the first few pages and more if they know what they're doing. Talk shows and interviewers and so on, it's changed rapidly. I guess you're on one end and Michael Savage is on the other.
I would welcome that description. Yeah.
And I've written both positive and negative on Michael Savage, and he has trashed me on the air and he's also praised me. He was actually in Tonga when I was there in the Peace Corps, but we didn't know it at the time. But he's an emotional person, but he's also a PhD. You hold a PhD.
Different fields, very different
fields, yes. Yeah. But the fact is, you're both accomplished in whatever you decide to pursue. Talk radio, talk shows have changed a lot. Do you think your audience is such that you can do what you're doing with your audience, but you couldn't do it with another audience?
I think that's probably accurate, yeah. In fact, I think somebody like Savage is largely an entertainer, trying to get people's blood pressure up, trying to get them to bang the dashboard, and you know, there's demagoguery that really goes on in terms of his performance, as far as I'm concerned. That's no secret. That's certainly not an ad hominem. It's just a repertorial observation. What we try to do is bring light, and I mean that in what I like to think of as the best sense of enlightenment, knowledge, dissemination of knowledge, and also bring different sides to an issue as well. So would that go on what commercial radio has become? No, I don't think so. So we have separate audiences. It's almost like two different cultures.
There are many audiences. I mean, the hardball audience on television with Matthews, who is a great journalist. He used to work for the Examiner here in San Francisco. You probably knew him.
I do.
And he was a great. He was a normal journalist, and now he has to turn up the heat. I was listening to Forum today. You weren't on because you're on vacation, and you're with us today. And you got somebody filling in. But it was interesting, I have to say, to hear several points of view at the same time. That's what's not happening.
Mm-hmm. It's not happening, right, and particularly not in talk radio. And it doesn't happen, I don't think, on a lot of the TV shows that claim to be talk shows. Most of the TV shows that are talk shows are nighttime comedian shows, essentially. But there are, talking heads on cable, on Fox, and so forth. I don't see much light coming out of those either. I see people, yelling at each other, but I don't see necessarily different points of view.
Are there any people you do admire that are coming up?
In the talk game?
The whole world of interviews and talk.
Well, I've often said that I respect and have had a good deal of respect through the years for Ted Koppel, who now is with NPR, by the way, who's left ABC, as you probably know, and Nightline and gone to NPR. I like a number of the people who work in public radio. I think some of them could be more exciting. I think sometimes I could be maybe a little more exciting or a lot more exciting.
But the tone of public radio and public television seems to be fairly stable. Whether it's Fresh Air on your station or C-SPAN, or that whole public area, there's a tone level that I can identify. It's to keep your emotions out.
It's a higher level of discourse that goes under the rubric of journalism. And when I speak of journalism in that way, I speak of it admiringly, of taking yourself out, which I don't do entirely, by the way. I'm guilty of putting myself in sometimes. We'll get to that. Yeah. But I think generally you're right about the tone, for the most part, of what you hear in public broadcasting. The host is not the entertainer. The host is not there to get the blood going or get the testosterone going or whatever. The host is there essentially to orchestrate, to be an interlocutor, and to move ideas forward and the life of the mind forward.
The tone, the emotional tone is clear, though. It really becomes clear as you go through, let's say, as I did today, Forum, Talk of the Nation, and Fresh Air. It's a impassionate detached interviewer.
You mean dispassionate then? I think.
Dispassionate, yes, dispassionate.
I want to make it sound passionate
Well,
because it's not that.
I see passion even when other people can't, and that's what I'm getting to. Let's take Charlie Rose, because we talked about that. My viewers, and anyone who watches this program knows that this program is based on Charlie Rose's program. I will not deny that. We made that conscious decision, except I'm sitting on the left and he sits on the right. But he gets very emotional when Iraq comes on, to the point that he loses that tremendous ability he has as an interviewer. I think we agree on that. I mean, you've seen some signs that he's not dispassionate.
No, I have indeed, and sometimes I think Charlie. I've known Charlie for years. There are things I like and respect about him, but inserts himself too much. I think there's a blending of how much to insert yourself. I write in my book about Afghanistan and about how at the time I felt that we really had no options except the military option.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan. I couldn't see us bombing with peace and love, and I didn't like the idea of bombing, but I didn't know how we were going to go after the Taliban, who were giving sanctuary to Al-Qaeda, unless we hit them and hit back for being hit ourselves. And I injected those opinions, and I made them clear. But at the same time, I did a program nationally on National Public Radio with only peace advocates when the support was going 85% the other way. I mean, I was with the 85%. I didn't see anything other than a military option. But I felt these voices needed to be heard. That seems to me to be emblematic in some ways of what we try to do in public radio.
But you probably didn't have you had the emotions reacting to 9/11. Okay, that is normal human emotions, which political correctness attempts to eliminate. That is a new evolution of human beings, that you don't have normal emotions. I mean, anger. The Michael Savage type is the extreme version of those angry feelings inside. You see 9/11, you see the buildings go down, you find your enemy, you get angry. That would be a human emotion. Did you have that emotion, or just was, we have to do this for our own security?
I had the emotion, and some of it bled through, I'm sure, because it's hard for me sometimes to really keep myself that contained.
Really?
But on the other hand, I felt that, there's that old idea of Edward R. Murrow, a calm voice in a time of trouble, and a steady voice, and a voice that can be reassuring. I felt that was my role and my responsibility, and I tried to assume that as much as I possibly could, and as professionally as I could. When I write my book off mic, I write about a guy off the air who has a bad temper, and who sometimes can blow his temper, but never on the air. And as far as revealing emotions, they've come across a few times, but never to the extent that it would off the air. Never. Always the professional mask, or whatever you want to call it, is there.
Okay, we talked about the Afghanistan war. The Iraq war is different. It has all of the perfect symmetry of the Vietnam War. In other words, all the elements are there. If you were a screenwriter, you couldn't draft it any more perfectly. The same characters are back. The same.
Except I have to tell you, because some friends of mine just returned from Vietnam, they love Americans in Vietnam.
I know.
When we leave Iraq, there's not going to be too many people who are in love with us. I'm afraid.
Nobody thought that the Vietnamese would ever love Americans either. I mean,
it's a very different kind of culture, though. It's entrepreneurial. It's been moving toward an American rapprochement, and now, if you're a tourist in Vietnam, like my friends were recently, they said it really is a kind of love. In fact, one of the commanders of the Viet Cong, they asked him, "How come you seem so welcoming and so amicable and affable to Americans?" And he said, "Well, we won the war." It was his response. It's hard for me to understand, for example, how you think that people from Vietnam would hate Americans, or people maybe from Central America, or people from Mexico, or other countries where we have interfered in ways that we shouldn't have. Instead, we're hated in places in the Middle East where, yes, we've been involved in Iran, keeping the Pahlavi throne, the peacock throne of the Shah and all that, but Yemen, Saudi Arabia, I mean, to some extent, we're seen as absolute mortal enemies by people in countries that we have been far more, benign to almost, in a sense, or neutral to. I mean, I suppose you could make the argument that Saudi Arabia we've been very allied with, and we're involved in their petroleum politics. Maybe even some would say helping the House of Saud to exist and to continue to exist, but nothing like what we did in Vietnam. I mean, it doesn't even compare. It's not even on the same kind of page.
the thing is this. Well, I don't know what your view is, but you were heavily against the war in Vietnam.
That's correct.
And heavily involved in supporting the civil rights movement.
Correct.
So, and from what I read, you had some emotion involved in that.
Absolutely.
Do you have any emotion involved with the Iraq War?
I do. but it's a different kind of emotion. And part of it is, I've often asked myself, why is there no protest movement like there was with Vietnam? And the answer seems very simple to me. It affected us personally. We were going to be conscripted. If we were against the war, we had so many choices. We either could go and be conscripted and perhaps go off to get killed or to get wounded or just to make our way out of the war in the best way we could, or to escape to Canada or to be a resistor or go to jail. I mean, those were the options, pure and simple. So it affected all of us. There's no draft anymore, and it really, I'm not saying that there should be a draft to engender a protest movement. I'm saying that it affects it in a non-personal way. I'm too long in the tooth to be concerned about the draft at this stage of my life, but I must tell you that I feel a kind of pain about Iraq. I feel a kind of emotional sense about it, and I feel a lot of ambivalence about it. I think that, I just had Christopher Hitchens on 2 days ago, and Hitchens for a long while was a darling of the left, and now he's become, a target, a friend of the neocons. He says, I'd rather be their friends than friends with Saddam Hussein. This is a guy whose history goes back to being a friend of the Kurds, and so, he really had a big stake in the Iraq war, and he supported it. He said, we're making progress there, we've kept al-Qaeda at bay, he gave all the facts, and I thought to myself, well, there is that side, but I see the other side, too. I see the side that says that it was it's been one of the worst executed wars. It almost makes Vietnam seem like a war executed with a certain modicum of genius by contrast. There have been so many foolhardy mistakes and foolish, inconsistent policies from this administration and from the military with respect to Iraq. And, you think about the cost of human life, and you think about the WMDs and all of the show and false nature of that.
All right. So you do have some emotion involved with this issue.
Sure.
Have you done programs on this issue?
I have, of course, many.
What happens to you when you do the program?
What happens to me when I do the program?
You switch off? I mean, you just turn
I don't
yourself?
switch off. I try to listen to both sides, and I try to be very aggressive and as formidable in terms of the questions that I ask to both sides as I can, which means, in effect, I try to be equitable. I try to let both sides be heard. And, when you have, say, somebody on like Norm Solomon on the one hand and Abe Sofair on the other hand, it can be very challenging. It's not necessarily me switching off my emotions, but it's me bringing my emotions into a different
Are you like a football
arena.
referee where, you have that, you're the final word and you keep everything orderly? Is that what you see your role? Obviously, Charlie Rose does not. He had a counterintelligence expert from the State Department, which I still have on my TiVo. It's so fascinating to watch. This guy was brilliant in describing counterintelligence, and he was so brilliant that it was frustrating Charlie Rose till by the end of the program he couldn't accept it, and he just went back to his old why did we go there in the first place? And you could see during the program, because he kept quiet, that he was holding it inside, and he was slightly being convinced that this new approach was working. My point is, he does not referee, and most of the broadcast interviewers do not referee. Do you referee when you have two hot guests and deliberately stay out of it, or will you come in and?
I don't entirely stay out. I do come in from time to time. It's not, otherwise you're just being a traffic cop. A referee even sounds a little bit too impartial to me. I do have opinions. I do have editorial points that I like to get across. But in some ways you can do that by the line of questioning. And you can do, if you're well prepared enough and if you've absorbed enough information, I absorb like a black hole, you can come into it and you can really present your point of view as well as be fair enough to be the devil's advocate and present that point of view too. And that's the marketplace of ideas.
Yes. This leads me to a question I have, and we've talked about on this program with other journalists, the whole idea of media and how the young get their information. And I've written an article about the fact that